What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of CP Sports Talk Podcast with Christian Paolantonio. In today's episode, we will be going over the Defenders' Week 2 win over Columbus, 44-26 on the road, along with the upcoming home opener at Audi Field against the Houston Gamblers. It only took to Week 3 to get there. After winning the UFL championship this past season to get the defending champs back at home. It should be an exciting weekend for the defending champions who should see a nice crowd at Audi Field. It looks like it's going to be some nice weather this weekend coming up. So Houston coming off of a big win against the Birmingham Stallions this past weekend. So they also moved to 1-1. Defenders obviously 1-1 going into this one as well. And I do want to go over this Columbus Aviators matchup, which was a few days ago, but I just want to go over it quickly and just kind of give my thoughts about it, go over the game, and get you guys caught up a little bit if you didn't see it or if you just wanted to hear my thoughts on it, because it was a few days ago. I did come out with an article breaking down the game, and I think it's only right to lead into this upcoming matchup with this past win against the Aviators. So, starting with the first quarter against Columbus. It was looking good on the ground early for the Defenders, who finished the game with 230 rushing yards, led by Deion Jackson. Jackson had 97 on the ground on only just 11 attempts, so he had an 8.8 average, which was huge. A lot of that yardage came from a 48-yard run in the second half, which started the separation against Columbus. And they really leaned on, a few guys in this game. Xavier Valladay had 9 carries for 36, and Abram Smith had 7 for 40 yards. So all the backs contributed in this game against Columbus. Like I said, it started with Deion Jackson getting a 1-yard touchdown in this one. Columbus, quickly answered in the game. Made it a 7-7 score. We're starting to see a lot of teams go for these PATs as well. I noticed in the second week. I don't think we had the PATs last year, unless I'm completely getting that wrong. But it's interesting to see a different strategy after just 1 week with a lot of the kickers. Unless you're desperate, you need points. A lot of the kickers were doing the PAT, so that was interesting. And then after the Aviators tied it up 7-7, we saw some field goals traded back and forth. DC was able to get into the end zone with Valladay, made it a 2-possession game. We saw a lot of Eric Ezukama, who was inactive, I believe, week 1. Seth Williams, as we all know, went down with that injury last week. In week 1, was placed on the IR. And I posted on my Twitter. I let people know I felt like Ezukama was really going to get a chance this upcoming week. DC is always kind of with Shannon Harris, at least, and those Reggie Barlow ties. Former Defenders head coach Reggie Barlow. They've always really valued that outside, that physical type receiver. At least having one guy that can be a bigger body. And Ezukama, I think this past week against Columbus, got his chance to show his versatility. Had a couple end around rushes, had a couple of sideline catches, almost had a toe tapping touchdown catch in the back of the end zone. Wasn't able to get the foot down, but anyways, Ezukama had a pretty big impact on the game whenever his number was called. So I was impressed with what I saw from him. I would expect to see more of the same this upcoming week. Ezukama did outsnap Braylon Sanders 28-6. I posted that as well on my Twitter. If you're not following, please do. My X or my Twitter is at C Paolantonio. That is CPAOLANTONIO_. And I'm really trying to get more into the snap counts and getting that good information out for you guys. So make sure you follow there. But yeah, just continuing on with this game. It was a 24-14 ball game after Zaquandre White. Oh my God, made a nice hurdle into the end zone to make it a 24-14 ball game. Towards the end of the first half, the Teamu McClendon traded interception. So neither quarterback had a great game. This was, like I said, a game that was built on the grounds for both teams, I would say, but more so for the Defenders, who really had one of their better games ever as a franchise on the ground this week with 230 rushing yards. In the start of the second half, John Lovett had a big run. It was a missed tackle by Brandon Smith that caused a big run right in the gap. He was in good position on the play, but wasn't able to wrap up. And this week, Brandon Smith is on the injury report with a hamstring injury. Did not practice to start the week, so hopefully we see that start to trend up. But I would expect Brandon Smith likely to miss this upcoming week. I know he missed a few plays in this past week's game. We'll go over the snap count in just a bit, but I've been a little bit disappointed with what we've seen from Brandon Smith. I know I'm not the only one that's thought that, but we'll see what happens with his injury. Hopefully, he's able to recover and ho- hopefully he's able to make a bigger impact on the game. But moving forward in this Columbus game, just trying to wrap this one up, DC was able to get the ball back after on the last drive with the Lovett run. Actually, this is one of the weirder plays we've seen in the UFL so far, so I thought I might as well go over it. We saw McClendon fumble in the pocket. We saw Farad Gardner, the defender, has been a long time defender now. Recover it. Thought he was touched down on the play. Thought he recovered it. Was touched down by a lineman, and got up to celebrate. And ended up he was not touched down. And Aviators receiver Antoine Wells Jr. made a tackle on Gardner. Gardner fumbles it, and Aviators receiver Tay Martin recovers it. So Columbus gets the ball back on a super wacky play. It's just one of those plays you never really see often at all. So Aviators were able to get the ball back, and I don't think they made anything out of that possession at all, even after all that. So after the defenders got the ball back after that weird play, Deion Jackson had that 48-yard touchdown run, which really started to separate the game with DC. DC really started to separate themselves in this second half against Columbus, and that Deion Jackson play was just the start of it. There was another turnover. Joe Wallace forced a fumble, gave DC the ball back in the red zone, and on that red zone possession, Te'amu found Briley Moore on one of the better plays from Te'amu really on the day. It was a tight end screen. Moore went into the end zone really untouched for a touchdown, extending that defender's lead to 38-14, of course. And just moving on. I mean, not moving on, but it was McClendon was able to toss a touchdown to Alize Mack late, but it really wasn't enough. And the defenders really looked good in that second half. We were able to close out the game. Gabriel Taylor, as he likes to go by now. He had a game clinching interception. He played a good game. Even better, Sam Kidd had an interception during this game as well, and he was named the UFL Defensive Player of the Week this week. The safety out of JMU, Sam Kidd, played all 70 defensive snaps this past week, which is super impressive. I believe he was the only DC Defenders defensive player to do that. So Sam Kidd's really starting to step up this year as a leader on and off the field. We know he's been a face of this franchise this past offseason. Shannon Harris has really propelled him as a leader, and it's evident on the field. I've been really impressed by Sam Kidd's play. So Sam Kidd, Defensive Player of the Week, good on him. Deion Jackson finishes the game with a UFL single game record, 3 rushing touchdowns. And it was just, it was a good game by DC. It was great to see them, look like they got some of that mojo back this past week. So quickly going over the week 2 defender snap counts. Like we all know, the DC Defenders defensive coordinator Blake Williams likes to run with a deep, unit. He values the versatility, guys that can do a lot of things. With that, you're going to see guys that are plugged in different spots and subbed in and out. So I think we have about 21 guys that played on defense for DC this past weekend. Some of that's due to the score as well. We saw some guys that probably wouldn't see these highest snap counts get some increased numbers this week. Somebody I thought that did well with the increased snaps was Ekal Boydo, the cornerback from Kansas State. He played 28 snaps. I thought he looked solid. I thought he was targeted a decent amount. I'm not sure the advanced stats on that. I do have the PFF grade somewhere if I could pull that up in a minute, but Boydo did have a pretty good game with all the targets he was receiving on the outside. Going from the top down on the defensive end before we go to the offense, Sam Kidd, like I said, played all 70 snaps on the defensive side. Second, we had Deontay Anderson with 68 snaps. Third was Gabe Taylor with 54 snaps. Brandon Smith was next, 46. Curtis Jacobs was 44. Roberson was 42. Joe Wallace with 41, Azizi Hearn with 40, DeAndre Baker with 39, Conley with 37. And those are the top guys right there. On the defensive line, Casey Rogers, 37, Maxwell, 36, Basham, 35. So, like I said, Williams is really letting these guys, keeping them fresh so they're able to make plays when it counts most. And I thought it did a good job this past week. So, on the offensive side, a few guys played all 50 snaps. Teamu, obviously, Michael Maietti, and Tarkin also played 50 snaps, all 50 snaps for the offense. Jalen Duncan was close. He played 48 snaps. Lasoya he saw a lot of time. I believe he came in for Doss around the midway point. He finished with 36 offensive snaps. Ty Scott led the receiving core with 36. And then the tight end group was about split, with Briley Moore and Fairchild having about 34, 33 snaps split between them. So the running backs, when you look at them, Deion Jackson had 20 snaps, Valladay had 18, and Abram Smith had 12. So they're keeping those guys fresh as well. It's good to see. And looking forward now, after looking at that snap count right there, one of the more surprising things was seeing Braylon Sanders with just 6 snaps this past weekend. I wonder if we see an increase this week. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of Ezekama snaps once again. I thought he played really well, but we'll just have to see. Fred Kais is, the one that's, has the majority of the control. Shannon Harris obviously is a big say in it as well, but we'll have to see about that one. We're going to go into the week 3 matchup now. Week 3 home opener against the Houston Gamblers. Like I said, they're 1-1, coming off a huge win against the Stallions. They seem to have the Stallions number almost these past few years. For DC, it's a big return after winning the UFL championship this past season. They return to the Beer Snake, the infamous rowdy Audi Field, celebrate their championship win. Wale will be performing the halftime show. He's a big name in the DMV area. He's got a deep connection to the area. So that'll be a good halftime show for the fans to see. And as we know, Houston this past week, Nolan Henderson was the offensive player of the week. He came in for Hunter Deckers, who started the game. Hunter Deckers, I believe, from Iowa State. And, he bounced around a couple places after having some issues with gambling. But Nolan Henderson was the guy who came in relief for Deckers past week and really did a good job in the win over the Stallions. And, both teams really this past week, week 2, had really strong ground attacks, which propelled them to wins, really. Obviously, Deion Jackson led the defenders. And the Gamblers had a couple of guys. They have Marcus Yarns, who was doing a good amount of the carries for the Gamblers. But the guy who led the way for them was Jalen White, who had a really strong performance. And we'll have to see if he, again, leads the backfield this upcoming week. But it was a really important win for the Gamblers and Kevin Sumlin's group. Kevin Sumlin, obviously the head coach over there, first-year head coach for them. But obviously we've seen him in the spring football space before. All right, back to the game. Sorry, I had some connection issues real quick, but Nolan Henderson was the offensive player of the week this past week for week 2. I kind of want to talk about the playmakers now going into this week 3 matchup with Houston starting out. We have John Trey Kirkland and Justin Hall, 2 spring league guys who have just really done a good job these past few years, wherever they've been, wherever the situation really, of making the most out of it. So those 2 guys are going to be guys to watch. We've seen Lawrence Keys be involved in special teams game. He's always been pretty good. But Jalen Moreno Cropper has been a guy that's kind of popped up out of nowhere. Didn't really hear a lot of preseason hype about him. They obviously have LeJean Winningham, who has seen some work. Kyle Oxley's been a guy that's been, I believe, inactive for them. Just kind of going down the roster real quick. But Cropper's been the guy that I believe could be an X factor in this game if you let him get in open space, or really just let Henderson sling it to him. I think that Blake Williams is going to dial up a lot of pressure against Henderson, rightfully so. I think Henderson doesn't deal with pressure well at all. But you've got to be aware that Henderson can run the ball. I think this is going to be a Derek Roberson type of game. I can see definitely a sack at least, possibly multi-sack game from Roberson, who I think is probably on his way to another all UFL season. So this is going to be a big game for the defense. If they can shut down Henderson and limit him on the ground, I think they're going to have success and win the game. But I do think it's going to be tight. Like I'll get into that later. But um, those are the receivers on the outside that I would worry about for the Roughnecks. I don't. I believe we talked about White already. If we haven't, then we'll circle back to him. Obviously, he led the game in rushing. Armani Rogers is the tight end for the Gamblers. I might have said the Roughnecks on accident once or twice already. Sorry if I did that, but it's hard getting used to sometimes. But they've got Armani Rogers, was a former Commander. He looked pretty good in preseason with the Commanders a few times. I'm obviously familiar with Rodgers and what he's done a little bit here. So he'll be interesting to watch. Cam Sutton's a spring league vet. He's a guy that's going to be playing a lot for them as well. Seen a good amount of snaps already this year. So this Roughnecks line is going to be one you could probably take advantage of. They've given up a lot of pressure, and I believe that we're going to see a lot of pressure coming from this Roughnecks defense. That doesn't mean that, or coming from this defender's defense. It doesn't mean the Gamblers' offense isn't going to have their chances against the defender's defense, who can be a bit aggressive at times, obviously. But I think it'll be interesting to see how Henderson handles the pressure. And moving on to the defenders playmakers, Ty Scott obviously has led the team in snaps, but he hasn't really seen a lot of success over the first two games. Not sure he even had a catch this past game. Let me check that out real quick. Nope, 0 catches on 1 target this past week. Cornell Powell obviously led the game with 4 catches for 41 yards, but Teamu just really wasn't isn't he doesn't have the type of games he was having the past 2 seasons really for DC. Um, Only had 99 yards against Columbus in week 2, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, was 8 of 11, which isn't, a bad completion percentage as a whole, but when you talk about just 11 pass attempts, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously they won the game, so that's really what matters, and they dominated on the ground, so that's not something you see a lot from any quarterback that's, played all 100% of the snaps, but I would hope that Teamu can get back on track with a much better game than he's had the first 2 weeks so far, against a Roughnecks defense that, has been decent so far, I will say that, but we'll have to see how they do, moving forward, so, um, yeah, and, like I said, with these defenders, receivers. Cornell Powell came back this week, led the way. They've obviously have Kiki Cootie, who hasn't really been too involved with the offense to start the season so far. As Ukama, we've already talked about, but you've got to start to wonder how much this team is missing a guy like Chris Rowland right now, who has done a good job for Orlando already. Was just a super reliable check down guy. Last year, he was an all purpose guy, did special teams work. We've seen a little bit of struggles on the special team return game for DC so far this year. So, um, yeah, I think this team is missing a guy like Chris Rowland. We'll continue to monitor that situation with Roland and how much that hole has been left from him not being here. But it's only 2 weeks in so far. But I would say that Tiamu's missing that safety valve. This will be a big test this week against the Gamblers, who I think are a little bit better than people thought they were in preseason. I know it's just 1 win so far against Birmingham, but I think this game's going to tell people a lot about both teams. I think these are 2 teams that are probably going to be competing for playoff spots until the final week, if I had to make the final guess right now about that. So, moving on to the Defenders defense, who had a strong week again this past week. Roberson is going to be one of my guys to watch this week in my game preview article. But for sake of this podcast, he's my guy to watch on the defensive side. I had to pick one. If I had to say one on the offensive side for DC this week, maybe we make this a thing where we go guys to watch or one to watch on each side of the ball each week. We're just starting this podcast thing, and I know I missed last week. I'm not going to make that a habit. I've just been started on a new job, so Just a little sidebar about that. Gonna try to keep making this a weekly thing with the preview and the post game pod. So, but if I had to pick a guy on the offensive side for DC this week to watch, I would say Ty Scott. I think he's due. I know people are going to be a little sour on him after putting up an egg last week, but I think that Ty Scott's due for a big week this week against a defense that I think Teamu can exploit. I think that that could happen. So we'll see about that. But like I said, Roberson's a guy to watch. We already went over the snap count, so we know the starters. But yeah, we're gonna see, like I said, the Blake Williams defenses. There's so many different groups of guys we see out there. Not sure we'll see Brandon Smith. He didn't practice. He was on the injury report. Quickly going over that injury report real quick. Deontay Anderson was limited with a right calf injury. Michael Maietti, left ankle, limited as well. Tykeem Doss, who I believe exited the game with an injury, with a left toe injury, was limited this past Tuesday, yesterday. And Brandon Smith, like I said, DMP, hamstring. And you got to be careful of those hamstring injuries. They can linger if you're not careful and if you're not cautious with them. So I'm gonna say Smith doesn't play. I'm gonna say Jacobs gets a start. I'm gonna say Baskerville is probably active again this week. And Macklin Ayers saw a good amount of snaps too this past week. So we'll see those guys switching in and out. And I believe Jacobs will see the majority of those. So, and then moving on to the Gamblers defense. Like I said, I believe they can be exploited in the secondary. I don't believe the corners are super strong. Obviously, Kerry Vincent, he's been playing, had a good start to the season. He had a pick this past week. He's a guy we'll watch out for sure. But this is, a team this is a defense that can be taken advantage of. Obviously, they're playing two former defenders this week with Malik Fisher and Anthony Hines, so that'll be another thing to watch. Hines has been exposed a few times this year in pass coverage, so I wonder if DC can do that to their old teammate. Fisher is going to be a guy you have to key in on, especially with some of the struggles we saw primarily in week 1 against St. Louis. This is a game wrecker like PETA from the Battlehawks that can, ruin your afternoon. So DC has to be aware of that. Fisher, is going to be hungry after he wasn't protected. So, yeah, that'll be something to watch for sure, Malik Fisher. And we are going to go into a few different things real quick before we head out of here. I know this has been a decently long episode, not super long, but if anybody's familiar with the Beltway Football Podcast with JP Finley and Mitch Tischler, also formerly with Pete Haley, they do a Benji bet, which is pretty much they guess the final score, put $100 on it. Normally, they'll give their podcast mates $100 if they guess the final score correctly. Obviously, I don't have any podcast mates or nothing, but just for fun, we're not going to put any stakes in it. I am going to try to put a final score bet, or not bet, just a prediction really on the game each week as we wrap up things. So this week with the DC Defenders hosting the Houston Gamblers, I'm going to go 27-20 DC over Houston. I think this is going to be a tight game. Like I said, I can see the rushing attacks being a focal point once again this week for both teams. I would like to see the passing game get going for DC. I think fans and I think the team really would feel a lot better about themselves if they can get something going through the air with Teamu, with this really talented receivers group for DC. I think they feel really good about themselves if they can do that. I think they've got to be careful of these playmakers for Houston. And they really, DC just can't shoot themselves in the foot. I think if they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they protect like they were doing last week. Don't let a guy like Malik Fisher wreck the game. And don't give up a lot of yaks to these guys like Justin Hall who can make you pay in certain situations. And then lastly, really just making Nolan Henderson uncomfortable, I think is going to be a big focal point this week. I think these guys are going to come out energetic in front of a Audi crowd that's been hungry to see their team after a championship win in 2025. So I think this is going to be a really fun Saturday afternoon. Kickoff is at noon from Audi Field. I unfortunately will not be present at the game. I'll be covering the game remotely, but I do plan on trying to make it to at least a couple DC games this year. This weekend doesn't work out for me, but I am excited about the fans this weekend, and how that's even going to look on the television with Audi Field, and hopefully a really packed crowd out there. So that'll be really fun. In closing, I hope that, like I said, I'm going to shout out my X or my Twitter one more time. My username is at C Paolantonio, at CPAOLANTONIO underscore. Um, and yeah, guys, I'm just, like I said, I'm going to try to make this a more consistent thing with the podcast. Also, I missed this one. Shoot. The team did also sign Javon Antonio this past week, in wake of Seth Williams being placed on the IR uh, following the week one game. I believe this is just more insurance and it's a smart signing. So I should have covered that earlier, but Javon Antonio was also signed this week. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything else. If I did miss anything else, you'll see it on my Twitter. I'm very, very active on there. Try to be very active each week on there with everything I do. Also doing a little storm coverage on there, as I am located in Florida still. So yeah, this has been a fun year so far. I appreciate everybody following along, and thanks again for listening. And if you are still listening, add another cup to the beer snake.